I'm recording this from my hotel room in Rome at 3:47 a.m. because I can't sleep, I can't eat. I can barely function after what Jesus showed me 72 hours ago about the final hours before the end of the world, and what I witnessed in those last moments before his return. It didn't just terrify me, it shattered everything I thought I knew about how this world will end. Before I tell you what could be the most important prophetic revelation of our time, I need you to do something. Look around you right now. Look at your normal life, your everyday surroundings, your regular routine. Because after you hear what I'm about to share, you'll never see any of it the same way again. And if this message grips your heart the way it's gripped mine, please subscribe and share this immediately. People need to know what's coming. They need to know what to watch for. They need to know what happens in hour 23 that changes everything. You know, after 4 years of playing Jesus, I thought I understood the end times. We've filmed scenes about his second coming, about the signs and wonders, about the final judgment. I've studied Revelation, Daniel, Matthew 24. I've read every prophecy book, watched every documentary about the last days, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what Jesus revealed to me about the actual final 24 hours before the end of the world. It happened 3 days ago here in Rome. We were filming some final promotional content for The Chosen at the Vatican. The irony of what happened next still gives me chills. Here I was, in the heart of religious tradition, about to receive the most radical prophetic vision of my life. I was alone in my hotel room at the Hotel de Roumie, just off the Piazza del Popolo. It was around midnight, and I couldn't sleep. The weight of finishing the series, of saying goodbye to this role that had changed my life, was keeping me awake. I was standing on my balcony, looking out over the eternal city, when I felt that familiar presence. But this time was different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with urgency, with an almost electric intensity that made my skin crawl. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds, and every light in the city seemed to flicker simultaneously. Jonathan. I turned, and there he was, Jesus. But he looked different. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a mixture of love and sorrow so profound it took my breath away, but also something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Lord, I whispered, my voice shaking. What's wrong? You look heartbroken, he said quietly. I'm heartbroken because it's almost time, and they're not ready. None of them are ready for what's coming. The way he said, it's almost time, sent ice through my veins. Lord, what do you mean? He walked to the edge of the balcony and looked out over Rome, this city that had seen the rise and fall of empires, that had witnessed 2,000 years of Christian history, that would soon witness something far more significant. The end, Jonathan. The final hours before I return. And what happens in those last 24 hours. He paused, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Jesus shuddered. What happens will test every soul on earth in ways they cannot imagine. My heart was racing. Lord, are you saying the end is soon? I'm saying I want to show you what those final hours will look like, he said, turning to face me. Because someone needs to warn them. Someone needs to help them prepare. Someone needs to tell them about the choice they'll face in hour 17 that will determine not just their eternity, but their sanity. I should have been terrified. I should have said no. But something in his voice, something in his eyes, told me this was the most important thing I would ever witness. Show me, Lord, I said. What happened next defies every law of physics I know. Jesus took my hand, and suddenly we were elsewhere. Not in a different place, but in a different time. A future time that felt both distant and terrifyingly close. We were standing on what appeared to be a mountaintop, looking down at the world below, but it wasn't the world as I knew it. The sky was the wrong color, a sickly yellow-green that hurt to look at. The air itself seemed thick, oppressive, like breathing through wet cloth. This is it, Jesus said solemnly. This is the final day, 24 hours before I return to judge the world and establish my kingdom. I looked down at the earth below us, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Cities were burning, but not from war or natural disasters. They were burning from something else, something that seemed to come from within the buildings themselves. What's happening down there? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The final test, Jesus said. For the last 24 hours before my return, every person on earth will face a choice that will reveal the true condition of their heart. And what you're seeing is the result of that choice. He gestured toward the burning cities. In hour 1, it begins with what looks like a technological breakthrough. Every screen on Earth, every phone, every computer, every television, every digital billboard, every demo will simultaneously display the same message. What message? Jesus' expression grew grave. An offer that will seem like the answer to every human problem, the solution to every crisis, the fulfillment of every dream. But it will come with a price that most people won't understand until it's too late. I watched in horror as the scene below us shifted, and I could see into homes, offices, schools around the world. Every person was staring at their screens with a mixture of wonder and hunger that made my stomach turn. What are they seeing? I asked. They're seeing perfection, Jesus said sadly. Perfect health, perfect wealth, perfect relationships, perfect happiness, all available instantly, all guaranteed forever. All they have to do is accept the offer. But what's the catch? Jesus looked at me with eyes full of infinite sorrow. The catch is that to receive this perfection, they have to surrender something they don't think matters, something they've been told is just a social construct, something the world has convinced them is outdated and irrelevant. What? Their soul, he whispered. Not in the dramatic, obvious way you might expect. It's presented as surrendering their individual consciousness to become part of a collective perfection. It's marketed as evolution, as transcendence, as the next step in human development. I watched as person after person around the world stared at their screens, and I could see the hunger in their eyes growing stronger. And they're going to accept it? Most of them, Jesus said, his voice breaking, because they've spent so long believing that this life is all there is, that material comfort is the highest good, that individual consciousness is just a chemical accident. They see no value in what they're being asked to surrender. But then I noticed something that gave me a flicker of hope. Not everyone was staring at the screens with hunger. Some people were backing away, their faces filled with horror and recognition. Who are they? I asked, pointing to those who were rejecting the offer. Those are my people, Jesus said. And for the first time since this vision began, he smiled. Those are the ones who understand that their soul is worth more than all the treasures of the world. Those are the ones who recognize the voice of the enemy, no matter how beautifully he disguises it. But what I saw next made me understand why Jesus had looked so heartbroken. The people who rejected the offer didn't just walk away peacefully. The moment they refused, something terrible happened to them. Lord, I gasped, what's happening to them? This is hour 2 through 6, Jesus said grimly. Those who refuse the offer become targets, not just of persecution, but of something far worse. Those who accepted the offer. They're no longer entirely human, and they can sense those who still have their souls intact. I watched in horror as the people who had accepted the offer began hunting those who had refused. But it wasn't like any persecution in history. These weren't just angry humans attacking other humans. These were beings who had traded their humanity for power, and they could literally sense the presence of a soul like a bloodhound senses a scent. They can smell them, Jesus said, reading my thoughts. Those who still have their souls emit a spiritual fragrance that the soulless find unbearable. It drives them into a frenzy of hatred and violence. I watched as families turned against each other, as neighbors became predators, as the world descended into a chaos unlike anything in human history. But it wasn't random chaos. It was organized, systematic, purposeful. This is why it terrifies me, Jesus said, and hearing him use that word made my knees weak. Not because I'm afraid of what they can do to me. I've already conquered death. But because I'm terrified of what they're choosing to become. I'm terrified of how many souls will be lost in these final hours. But Lord, I said desperately, surely your people will be protected. Surely you'll rapture them before this happens. Jesus looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, love and sorrow and something that looked almost like regret. Jonathan, he said gently, what if I told you that the rapture isn't what most people think it is? What if I told you that my people are meant to be here for these final hours, not as victims, but as witnesses? What if I told you that what happens in hour 17 will require their presence on earth? My mind was reeling. Everything I'd been taught about the end times was being turned upside down. What happens in hour 17? That's when the real test begins, Jesus said. That's when those who kept their souls will face a choice that makes the first offer look simple. That's when they'll discover what they're really made of. He gestured toward the chaos below us. What you're seeing now, the persecution, the hunting, the violence, this is just the preparation. This is just separating the wheat from the chaff. Hour 17 is when the wheat itself gets tested. Tested how? Jesus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. They'll be offered a way out, a way to save not just themselves, but everyone they love. All they have to do is deny me. Just once. Just publicly. just to stop the suffering. I felt like I was going to be sick. And if they don't, then they'll watch everyone they love die, Jesus said, tears streaming down his face. They'll watch their children tortured. They'll watch their spouses murdered. They'll watch their parents executed, and they'll know that one word from them, one simple denial, could stop it all. Lord, I whispered, that's impossible. No one could endure that. Some will, he said firmly. Some will choose me, even when it costs them everything. Some will understand that their temporary suffering is nothing compared to eternal separation from love itself. Some will trust that I can resurrect what death takes away. And the others? Jesus closed his eyes, and I saw a tear fall. The others will break. They'll deny me to save their loved ones. And in that moment of denial, they'll lose their souls, just as surely as if they had accepted the first offer. I was beginning to understand the full horror of what I was witnessing. So the final hours aren't just about separating believers from unbelievers. They're about testing the believers to see who really believes. Yes, Jesus said sadly, because it's easy to say you believe when belief costs you nothing. It's easy to claim you love me when loving me brings you comfort and community and purpose. But when loving me costs you everything, that's when you discover what's really in your heart. But then I saw something that confused me. In the midst of all this chaos and testing and horror, there were pockets of light. Literally, there were places on earth that seemed to glow with a soft, warm radiance that pushed back the sickly yellow-green of the sky. What are those lights? I asked. Jesus smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Those are my remnant. Those are the ones who are passing the test. And what's happening in those places of light, that's what will make the terror of these final hours worth it. What's happening there? Miracles, Jesus said simply. Not just healings and provisions, though there are plenty of those, but miracles of transformation. People who have spent their entire lives as enemies becoming family, addicts being instantly freed from their bondage, the proud becoming humble, the hateful becoming loving, the fearful becoming bold. I watched in amazement as the pockets of light seemed to pulse and grow, drawing people from the surrounding darkness like moths to a flame. This is the harvest, Jesus explained. This is why my people have to be here for these final hours. In the midst of the greatest darkness in human history, they become the brightest lights the world has ever seen. And people who would never have listened to the gospel in normal times become desperate enough to hear it. So the persecution, the testing, the horror, it's all to create this harvest? It's all to reveal what was always true, Jesus corrected gently. The persecution reveals who really loves me. The testing reveals who really trusts me. The horror reveals who really believes that I am worth more than this temporary life. And the harvest reveals that even in the darkest hour, love wins. But then the scene shifted again, and I saw something that made me understand why Jesus had said this vision would terrify me. We were now looking at hour 23, just 1 hour before his return. And what I saw happening to both the faithful and the faithless in that final hour changed everything I thought I knew about the end of the world. What I witnessed in hour 23 shattered every preconception I had about how the world would end. As we watched the final 60 minutes before Christ's return, the scene below us transformed in ways that defied all logic, all physics, all understanding of reality itself. This is the hour that will test even the elect, Jesus said, his voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't identify. This is when the enemy plays his final card, and it's so convincing, so perfect, so seemingly divine, that even my chosen ones will question everything they believe. I watched as the chaos and persecution that had defined the previous 23 hours suddenly stopped. Just stopped. The hunting ceased, the violence ended, the screaming fell silent. An eerie peace descended over the entire world. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Watch," Jesus said grimly. Suddenly, every screen on earth lit up again. But this time, instead of the offer that had started this nightmare, something else appeared. Someone else appeared. It was Jesus. Or at least, it looked exactly like Jesus. It moved like him, spoke like him, radiated the same love and authority I had come to know. But standing next to the real Jesus, I could sense something fundamentally wrong with this image, something that made my soul recoil even as my eyes were drawn to it. "My beloved children," the figure on the screen said, and its voice was so perfectly like Jesus's voice that I actually turned to look at the real Jesus beside me to make sure he wasn't speaking. "I have come to end your suffering. I have come to bring peace to this world. I have come to establish my kingdom on earth." Around the world, I watched as people fell to their knees in worship. Not just the soulless ones who had accepted the first offer, but many of those who had refused it. Many of those who had endured 23 hours of persecution and testing. Many of those who had been in the pockets of light. No, I breathed. No, they can't be fooled by this. They've been so faithful, so strong. This is why this hour terrifies me, Jesus said, and his voice was filled with anguish. Because this deception isn't aimed at the weak or the faithless. It's aimed specifically at my most devoted followers. It's designed to fool the very elect. I watched as the false Jesus on the screens began performing miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead, feeding the hungry. But these weren't just illusions or tricks. These were real miracles, with real power, producing real results. How is this possible? I asked, my voice shaking. Because the enemy has been given permission to use my own power against my people, Jesus said, tears streaming down his face. For this 1 hour, Satan is allowed to perform genuine miracles, to speak genuine truth, to offer genuine peace. Everything he does will be real, except for one thing. What? His identity, Jesus said simply. He can do everything I can do, say everything I would say, offer everything I would offer, but he cannot be me. And the only way my people will know the difference is if they know me intimately enough to recognize that something is missing. I watched in horror as more and more of the faithful began bowing to the screens, accepting this false Jesus as their returning Lord. Even some who had been in the brightest pockets of light, even some who had endured the worst persecution, even some who had passed every previous test. But Lord, I said desperately, how can they be expected to tell the difference? If he can do everything you can do. Because love cannot be perfectly counterfeited, Jesus said firmly. Satan can mimic my power, my words, my actions, even my appearance, but he cannot truly love. And those who know me intimately, those who have spent time in my presence, those who have learned to recognize the sound of my voice, they will sense that something is missing. As he spoke, I began to notice that not everyone was bowing. Scattered around the world, I could see individuals and small groups who were backing away from the screens, their faces filled with horror and recognition. There, Jesus said, pointing to them with something that looked like pride. Those are my true bride. Those are the ones who know me so well that they can sense the absence of genuine love, even when everything else appears perfect. I watched one woman in particular, an elderly lady, who had clearly endured terrible persecution. She was staring at the screen where the false Jesus was performing miracle after miracle, offering peace and comfort and an end to all suffering. Tears were streaming down her face, and I could see the desperate longing in her eyes. She wants to believe it's really you, I said. Of course she does, Jesus replied. She's suffered more in the last 23 hours than most people suffer in a lifetime. She's watched her family die, her friends tortured, her world destroyed. She wants nothing more than for this nightmare to end. So why isn't she bowing? Jesus smiled through his tears. Because she spent 40 years in prayer. Because she knows the sound of my voice. Because when she looks at that screen, she doesn't feel the love she's experienced in my presence for decades. She sees the miracles, she hears the words, she recognizes the appearance, but she doesn't feel me. But then I watched as the false Jesus on the screen seemed to look directly at this woman, as if he could see her through the screen. My daughter, he said, and his voice was filled with what sounded like perfect compassion. I know you're afraid. I know you've suffered, but I am here now. Your testing is over. Come to me, and I will give you rest. The woman's resolve began to waver. I could see the exhaustion, the pain, the desperate need for this nightmare to end warring with her spiritual discernment. This is the moment, Jesus said quietly. This is when the final separation occurs. Those who choose comfort over truth, those who choose what they want to hear over what they know in their spirit, those who choose the easy path over the narrow path, they will bow. I held my breath as I watched the woman struggle. The false Jesus continued speaking to her, offering her everything she had lost, promising her everything she had ever wanted. And slowly, heartbreakingly, she began to kneel. No, I whispered. She was so close, she almost made it. But just as her knees were about to touch the ground, she stopped. She looked up at the screen one more time, and I saw something change in her eyes. I don't feel your love, she said quietly. You look like him, you sound like him, you act like him, but I don't feel his love. And she stood up and walked away from the screen. The moment she did, something terrible happened. The false Jesus on the screen transformed, his face contorting with rage, his voice becoming a shriek of fury. Then you will die, he screamed. You will die in agony, and everyone you ever loved will die with you. But the woman just smiled. "I've already died," she said peacefully. "I died to myself 40 years ago when I gave my life to the real Jesus. You can kill my body, but you cannot touch my soul. This," Jesus said, his voice filled with love and pride, "is what the final hour is really about. It's not about surviving persecution or enduring suffering or even performing miracles. It's about knowing me so intimately that you can recognize my absence even when everything else seems present." I watched as similar scenes played out around the world. Some of the faithful, exhausted by 23 hours of testing, chose the comfort of the false Jesus over the uncertainty of continued suffering. But others, those who had cultivated deep intimacy with the real Jesus over years and decades, recognized the counterfeit and refused to bow. "How many will pass this final test?" I asked. Jesus was quiet for a long moment. "Few," he said finally. "Fewer than I wish, more than the enemy hopes." But then, something incredible happened. As the false Jesus on the screens continued to rage and threaten, as his true nature became more and more apparent, some of those who had initially bowed began to stand up again. "They're changing their minds," I said in amazement. "The enemy's greatest weakness," Jesus said with a smile, "is that he cannot maintain the deception indefinitely. His hatred, his pride, his lust for power, and they always eventually show through. And when they do, even some who were initially deceived will recognize the truth." I watched as more and more people began backing away from the screens, as the false Jesus's mask continued to slip, as his promises of peace gave way to threats of violence. "But what about those who don't change their minds?" I asked. "What about those who continue to worship him even after his true nature is revealed?" Jesus's expression grew grave. "Those are the ones who have chosen deception over truth so many times that they can no longer recognize the difference. Those are the ones who love darkness more than light. Those are the ones who will be with him when I return." "Which brings us to hour 24, he continued, and suddenly the scene around us began to change again. The sickly yellow-green sky began to crack like glass, and through the cracks I could see something that made my heart race with both terror and joy. "This is it," Jesus said, and his voice was filled with power and authority I had never heard before. "This is the moment I return. This is the moment when every knee bows and every tongue confesses. This is the moment when the testing ends and the judgment begins." Through the cracks in the sky I could see armies of angels, more numerous than the stars, all arrayed in perfect formation. I could see the throne of God, blazing with light so brilliant it made the sun look dim. And I could see Jesus, not the Jesus standing beside me, but Jesus as he truly is, Jesus in his full glory and power and majesty. "Are you ready?" I asked the Jesus beside me. He looked at me with eyes that held all the love and sorrow and joy and determination of eternity. "I've been ready for 2,000 years, he said. "The question is, are they ready?" I looked down at the world below us, at the people who had passed the final test and the people who had failed it, at the faithful remnant and the deceived masses, at the pockets of light and the oceans of darkness. "Some are," I said quietly. "Yes," Jesus agreed. "Some are. And for their sake, for the sake of those who chose truth over comfort, who chose love over deception, who chose me over everything else, for their sake, it will all have been worth it." But then he turned to me with an urgency that made my blood run cold. "But Jonathan, this is why I'm showing you this. This is why you have to warn them. Because most of my people are not ready for what's coming. Most of them think they know me, but they don't know me intimately enough to recognize my absence. Most of them are depending on their theology instead of their relationship, their knowledge instead of their love. What do they need to do?" I asked desperately. "They need to fall in love with me," Jesus said simply. "Not with their idea of me, not with their doctrine about me, not with their church's version of me. They need to fall in love with me, because in that final hour, when everything else fails, when every other test proves inadequate, the only thing that will save them is love." He gestured toward the woman who had passed the final test. She didn't recognize the counterfeit because she was theologically sophisticated. She recognized it because she was in love. She had spent so much time in my presence, had cultivated such intimacy with me, that she could feel the absence of genuine love even when everything else seemed perfect. "How do people cultivate that kind of intimacy?" I asked. "The same way you cultivate intimacy with anyone," Jesus said. "Time, attention, conversation, vulnerability. You can't love someone you don't know, and you can't know someone you don't spend time with." As he spoke, the vision began to fade, and I found myself back on the hotel balcony in Rome. But the urgency in Jesus' voice remained. "Tell them, Jonathan. Tell them that the end is closer than they think, and they're not ready." Tell them that in the final hours, their survival won't depend on their knowledge or their good works or their church attendance. It will depend on whether they know me well enough to recognize my voice in the darkness. But Lord, I said, how do I convince people to take this seriously? How do I make them understand the urgency? Jesus looked at me with eyes that held the weight of eternity. Tell them what happens to those who fail the final test. Tell them what I saw in the eyes of those who chose the counterfeit over the real thing. Tell them about the moment when they realized what they had done, and it was too late to change their minds. And what he showed me next about the fate of those who failed the final test was so horrifying, so heartbreaking, that I understood why he had said this vision would terrify me. What Jesus showed me about the fate of those who failed the final test will haunt me for the rest of my life. As the vision of his return began to unfold, I watched something that broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. Look at their faces, Jesus said softly, pointing to those who had bowed to the false Christ. Look at them when they see me, the real me, coming in the clouds. I watched as the sky split open completely and Jesus descended in his full glory. The light was so brilliant that every person on earth could see him clearly, no matter where they were. And in that moment of revelation, I saw the most heartbreaking thing I've ever witnessed. The people who had worshipped the counterfeit suddenly realized their mistake. I could see it in their eyes, the exact moment when they understood that they had been deceived, that they had chosen a lie over the truth, that they had rejected the real Jesus for a fake one. "No!" one man screamed, falling to his knees. "No, I thought it was you. I thought you had come back. I was worshiping you." But it was too late. The choice had been made. The final test had been failed. "This is what terrifies me most," Jesus said, his voice breaking. "Not their rebellion, not their hatred, not their defiance, but their realization. The moment when they understand what they've lost and there's no way to undo it." I watched as millions of people who had genuinely believed they were worshiping Jesus discovered they had been worshiping his enemy. The anguish on their faces, the desperation in their voices, the absolute horror of their realization, everyone, it was unbearable to witness. "But Lord," I said desperately, "they were deceived. They thought they were choosing you. Surely that counts for something." Jesus looked at me with infinite sadness. "Jonathan, why were they deceived?" I thought about what I had witnessed, because the counterfeit was so perfect, so convincing. "No," Jesus said gently. "They were deceived because they didn't know me well enough to recognize the deception. They were deceived because they had spent years believing in me without actually knowing me. They were deceived because they had substituted religious activity for intimate relationship." The weight of this truth hit me like a physical blow. So it wasn't enough to believe in you. They had to know you. "You can believe in someone you've never met," Jesus said. "You can even worship someone you've never spent time with. But you cannot recognize the voice of someone you don't know intimately. You cannot detect the absence of love in someone you've never experienced love from." As the vision continued, I saw the stark contrast between those who had passed the final test and those who had failed it. The ones who had recognized the counterfeit were filled with joy even in the midst of their suffering. They were running toward the descending Jesus with faces radiant with love and anticipation. But those who had been deceived were backing away in terror, not because they didn't want Jesus, but because they realized they had never really known him. I went to church every Sunday. One woman was crying. I read my Bible, I prayed, I served in ministry. How could I not recognize you? "Because," Jesus said sadly, "she did all those things about me, but she never did them with me. She studied me like a subject instead of knowing me like a person. She served me like a duty instead of loving me like a friend." Suddenly, we were back in my hotel room in Rome. The vision was over, but the weight of what I had seen was crushing. I fell into a chair, my hands shaking, my mind reeling from the implications of what I had witnessed. "Lord," I whispered, "how do I tell people this? How do I warn them without terrifying them? How do I help them understand the urgency without causing panic?" Jesus sat across from me, and his presence filled the room with both comfort and urgency. "You tell them the truth, Jonathan. You tell them that the end is coming, and when it does, their survival will depend not on what they know about me, but on how well they know me personally." "But how do people develop that kind of intimacy with you?" I asked desperately. "How do they move from knowing about you to actually knowing you?" Jesus smiled, and it was like sunrise after the darkest night. "The same way you've gotten to know me over these past 4 years. Not by studying scripts about me, but by spending time with me. Not by learning facts about me, but by talking with me. Not by performing for me, but by being vulnerable with me." He leaned forward, his eyes intense with love and urgency. "Tell them to stop trying to impress me and start trying to know me. Tell them to stop performing for me and start talking to me. Tell them to stop studying about me and start spending time with me. What does that look like practically? I asked. It looks like prayer that's conversation instead of monologue, Jesus said. It looks like reading my word to hear my voice, not just to gain knowledge. It looks like worship that's about intimacy, not performance. It looks like service that flows from love, not duty. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Rome. Jonathan, in that final hour, when the greatest deception in human history is unleashed, the only thing that will save my people is love. Not theological knowledge, not biblical literacy, not church attendance, not good works. Love, intimate, personal, experiential love. How much time do we have? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Jesus turned back to me, and his expression was grave. The signs are already beginning. The technology that will make the final deception possible already exists. The spiritual conditions that will make people susceptible to that deception are already in place. The separation between those who know me intimately and those who only know about me is already happening. My heart was racing. Are you saying it could happen soon? In our lifetime? I'm saying, Jesus replied carefully, that every generation should live as if it could happen in their lifetime. But yes, the convergence of signs, technology, and spiritual conditions suggests that this generation may be the one that faces these final hours. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Lord, I'm just an actor. I'm not a prophet or a preacher or a theologian. Who's going to listen to me about something this important? Jesus looked at me with eyes full of love and confidence. Jonathan, for 4 years you've portrayed me on screen. Millions of people have seen my love through your performance. They've connected with me through your portrayal. They trust you to represent me accurately. That's why I chose you to deliver this message. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt his love and strength flow through me. Besides, this message isn't about your authority or credentials. It's about truth, and truth has its own power to convince those who are ready to hear it. What if people think I'm crazy? What if they say I'm just trying to get attention or sell something? Some will, Jesus said honestly, but others will recognize the truth in what you're saying because my spirit will confirm it in their hearts, and those are the ones this message is really for. He walked back to where I was sitting and knelt down in front of me, taking my hands in his. Jonathan, I need you to understand something. The people who will pass the final test, the ones who will recognize the counterfeit because they know me intimately, they're not necessarily the ones you'd expect. What do you mean? Some of them are sitting in churches right now, but they're hungry for more than religious routine. Some of them have never been to church, but they're seeking truth with all their hearts. Some of them are pastors who are tired of preaching about me without really knowing me. Some of them are atheists who are about to discover that what they rejected wasn't me at all, but a counterfeit version of me. This gave me hope. So this message isn't just for Christians? This message is for everyone who wants to know the truth about what's coming, Jesus said firmly. Because in those final hours, denominational labels won't matter. Church membership won't matter. Religious pedigree won't matter. The only thing that will matter is whether someone knows my voice well enough to recognize it in the darkness. He stood up, and I knew our time was ending. Tell them, Jonathan. Tell them that the final hours are coming, and they need to prepare. Not by stockpiling food or building bunkers or studying prophecy charts. They need to prepare by falling in love with me. How do I help them do that? Teach them to pray like they're talking to a friend, not reciting to a distant deity. Teach them to read my word like they're reading love letters, not studying textbooks. Teach them to worship like they're spending time with someone they adore, not performing for someone they're trying to impress. As Jesus began to fade, his final words burned into my heart. Tell them that in the final hour when everything else fails, love will be enough. But only if it's real love, intimate love, personal love. Tell them to stop settling for knowing about me and start insisting on knowing me. Their eternal destiny may depend on it. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in my hotel room with the most important message I've ever been given. That was 3 days ago, and I haven't been able to think about anything else since. Every person I see, I wonder, do they know Jesus intimately enough to recognize his voice in the darkness? Are they prepared for the final test? Do they understand what's coming? And that's why I'm recording this at 3:47 a.m. in a hotel room in Rome. Because if what Jesus showed me is true, and I believe with every fiber of my being that it is, then people need to know. They need to prepare. They need to move from knowing about Jesus to actually knowing Jesus. If you're watching this and you've been a Christian for years, I want to ask you a hard question. Do you know Jesus well enough to recognize his voice in the darkness? If someone who looked like him, sounded like him, and performed miracles like him tried to deceive you, would you be able to tell the difference? If you're not sure, then you need to start cultivating intimacy with him now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when it's more convenient. Now. Because according to what Jesus showed me, we may not have as much time as we think. If you're watching this, and you're not a Christian, or you've been hurt by Christians, or you've rejected what you thought was Christianity, I want you to know that the Jesus I encountered is nothing like the religious caricature that so many people have been presented with. He's not interested in your performance or your perfection. He's interested in your heart. He wants to know you, and he wants you to know him. If you're watching this and you're scared by what I've shared, good, you should be scared. But don't let fear paralyze you, let it motivate you. Let it drive you to seek the kind of intimate relationship with Jesus that will prepare you for whatever is coming. Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to pray, but not the kind of prayer you might be used to. I want you to talk to Jesus like he's sitting right there with you, because he island. Tell him you want to know him, not just know about him. Tell him you want the kind of relationship that will help you recognize his voice in any circumstance. Jesus, I don't want to be deceived in the final hours. I don't want to mistake a counterfeit for the real thing. I want to know you so well that I could recognize your voice in the darkest night. Teach me to love you, not just believe in you. Teach me to know you, not just know about you. Help me to cultivate the kind of intimacy with you that will prepare me for whatever is coming. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you've just taken the first step toward the kind of relationship that will sustain you through the final hours. But don't stop there. Start spending time with Jesus every day. Start talking to him like a friend. Start reading his word like you're getting to know someone you love. And please, share this message. Someone in your life needs to hear this. Someone needs to know what's coming. Someone needs to understand that their eternal destiny may depend on how well they know Jesus. The final hours are coming. The ultimate test is approaching. The greatest deception in human history is being prepared. But love will be enough. If it's real, intimate, personal love. Are you ready? Do you know him well enough? The time to prepare is now. I love you all. Jesus loves you more, and he's coming soon.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with us today. I truly hope that this message has strengthened your faith, brought peace to your heart, and reminded you of the endless love of Jesus Christ. Whatever you may be facing right now, please remember that you are never alone. Jesus is walking beside you through every joy, every struggle, and every uncertain moment. His grace is greater than your fears. His love is stronger than your pain, and his light can guide you through even the darkest times. Keep praying, keep trusting, and place your worries in his hands. Jesus knows your heart, hears every prayer, and will give you the strength you need to keep moving forward. If this message blessed you, please share it with someone who may need hope today and subscribe to join our community. May Jesus bless you, protect your family, and fill your life with faith, love, and peace. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless you.
Maranatha. Even so, come Lord Jesus, and help us to be ready when you do.